Hi everyone, thank you guys for joining us today. My name is Parvina. I am in charge of researching and writing the program for our upcoming 13th Energy Storage World Forum Virtual Conference, which is a 3-day virtual conference taking place next month, 25th to 27 November. During my research, easing the integration of the distributed energy resources into the grid came up as one of the main topics of interest. So we decided to organize this pre-forum session to give you guys a little taste of the type of discussions that will be taking place at the full conference next month. And yeah, please feel free to use the chat function to share your views and ask questions. And with that, I will hand you over to Olivier from INEA Consulting, who will be moderating today's session. Olivier?
Thanks, Parvina, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon to those connecting from Australia and Asia, and good morning to those listening in Europe. And thank you all for joining today. So I'm Oliver, the managing partner of NEA in Australia, and I will be introducing today's session. So we are a strategy consultancy, and we support our clients in maximizing energy transition opportunities. We do so by helping them develop their strategy, leverage innovation and emerging technologies. In Australia, a significant share of our work is in the power sector, has been on distributed energy resources, known as DER, including energy storage, and in particular on the integration in the power system. Indeed, Australia is spearheading the shift to a more decentralized energy system and is well on its way to become the country with the highest share of distributed energy globally. It is expected that in 2030, so in 10 years, half of consumers in Australia will use some form of DER, be it solar PV, controllable load, energy storage, EVs, or a combination of the above. That rapid uptake of DER and of large-scale inverter-based generation is creating new challenges for the Australian energy system at every level, from resource adequacy consideration at system level, to system strength issue at transmission level, and voltage questions at distribution level, to name a few. Accordingly, a number of initiatives and rule change and regulatory consideration are aimed to ease the integration of DER into the Australian grid and energy system, and a lot more are in the pipeline. The target to address technical challenges, but also market and regulatory shortcomings, as well as ensure the transition to a low carbon and distributed energy system leaves no one behind. It is an exciting time to be working in the energy sector, and especially so in Australia. It is therefore my pleasure to be moderating today's panel, and I will now introduce our three panelists. So we'll start by hearing from Ed Chan. Ed is a director at the Australian Energy Market Commission, known as the AEMC, and currently leads the AEMC's program on DER integration. In particular, he represents the AEMC in the Australian Renewable Energies Agency's Distributed Energy Integration Program and the Energy Security Board's DER Integration Steering Committee. Thanks, Ed, for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your insight on the DER initiatives you're involved in and driving. Our second panelist is Dani Alexander. Dani is a researcher at University of Technology, Sydney. Her research focuses on DER and on ways to promote energy system flexibility. Dani is also the business program leader at the newly established RACE for 2030 Cooperative Research Centre. That program will focus on research boosting energy productivity and demand flexibility. Thanks, Dani, for participating to the roundtable. And finally, let me introduce James Allston to our virtual stand. James is the founder and managing director of New Energy Ventures, a management consultancy bringing together commercial and regulatory advisory services. In particular, New Energy Ventures focuses on DER opportunities in the commercial and industrial segments. Welcome, James. Welcome, Ed and Dani. And I leave the stand to Ed.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I'm actually having a bit of trouble putting my slides up on the screen. Oliver, you've got a copy of my slides. Are you able to share that with the group?
Yes, nice handball, Ed. Let me see what I can do. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how to share my screen either.
It's the joys of technology, isn't it? It's
Pavina, is there anything you need to do on your side? Because there is no, I don't think there is any. Oh, there it is. Hang on a minute.
There's a little computer screen.
I just need to.
Bottom 4 buttons on there. If you click that, it should give you the option to share a screen.
Yeah. Yes, it does. There you go. There you go.
Thank you. My apologies with the delay in starting. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Ed Chan. I'm one of the policy directors at the Australian Energy Market Commission. Next slide, please, Oliver. So before we get into the content of the slide, I think it'll be good for me to just introduce who I work for. So the AEMC is the rule maker for the Australian electricity and gas markets. Next slide. What we do is that our organisation make and amend 3 sets of rules. So we've got in Australia the National Electricity Rules, which governs the operation of largely the network businesses, so distribution network businesses as well as transmission businesses, but also the gas networks and the energy retail rules. The AEMC also provide market development advice to government. So it's something that we didn't start doing when we first were created, but more and more because of what we do in market design and market reforms, we often call upon to provide advice to governments. And on this slide here, you've got 4 logos, and they represent what we call the Energy Market Institution in Australia. So on top of it is the Energy Security Board, which is a coordinating body consists of the chairs of the AEMC, the left-hand side, the Australian Energy Regulator on the middle, and Australian Energy Market Operator on the right, plus 2 independent members. So the 4 institutions together, we are really sort of charged with working on a number of issues within the Australian energy sector, both from a reform perspective, but also setting out the future market direction. Next slide, please, Oliver. So let's talk a little bit about the grid of the future in a decentralized world, seeing that this is about easing DER into the system. Next slide. So over the next few slides, there are a number of figures that I will put forward, and I can almost sort of guarantee that those figures are out of date by the time that you read it. Now, I think it's Oliver frozen. We got the next slide.
This is the slide, Ed. I'm sorry, but I'm already on slide 8 because you seem to be hinting at me moving forward. But
yeah, no, I think I've lost you, or maybe I was or my connection was dropped off a little bit. So I think the few slides before talked about the level of distributed resources. That's right. That's good. We'll stay here. So by 2050, the Australian system is expected to have 2 out of 3 customers will have some form of distributed resources. So in talking about distributed resources, hopefully the graphic here gives you an indication we're not just talking about solar panels and batteries, but also smart devices, increasingly things like electric vehicles. Next one, please. And this one gives you an indication of what it looks like. So with quite significant capacity, by 2039, you've got 16 gigawatts worth of rooftop and perhaps 75 of residential, 7.5 gigawatts of residential storage. And we think at least 25% of vehicles would be electric vehicles using some sort of hybrids. Next one. In our minds, or at least in the Energy Market Institution's view, the future system really relies on the efficient integration of distributed resources. And if we do that properly, it'll benefit everyone and not just those who have the capability or access to it. What we're envisaging is a dynamic and resilient system that uses a lot of new technology, business model creating different dimensions. But most important of all are the two bottom dot points, which is a consumer-centric system, which does what the consumer wants and also benefit all the users, not just those who have them. Next slide. It is no small task, and this is one of the reasons why the Energy Security Board DER Integration Steering Committee is formed. So within the Security Board, there are subcommittees, and there is a specific one which goes to DER integration, and I'm a member of it along with my colleagues from the AER and AEMO. And there's also a program run by ARENA, which is called the Distributed Energy Integration Program. Again, that's a delivery arm of a lot of the programs that we do. But other than that, we've got research organization, businesses, consumer groups. There's a few people involved. Next one, please. Another one. Before we go and talk about the work plan or the DER roadmap, I think it's useful to touch on the vision. We've talked a lot about the background and context before, but there are two things that we work towards as energy market institution. The first one is called the National Electricity Objective. Now, this is an objective enshrined within the laws or the energy laws in Australia. And really the key part of it is about for the long-term interest of consumers. And if you dial that down to how it actually operationalize, the DER steering committee take a more pragmatic approach in putting it in optimizing the benefits of distributed resources for all system users. Next slide, please. There are three dimensions in DER integration in our view, and that's trying to cover sort of the broad gamut of integration. So we've got the technical and operational challenges at the top, market, business model on the right, and the regulatory planning challenges on the left. So when we talk about technical, it's all the system security, network reliability, all we call the techie stuff. But separate to that, we've also got the market and business model, because in Australia, the system has a combination of monopoly operators in the network distributors and also retailers and third-party providers who are competitive. And on the left-hand side, there's always the regulatory and planning challenges when it comes to energy market operations. Next, please. This is a graphical way in trying to show the kind of work plan and the whole picture of the integration, but we won't have time to cover all of it. So on this slide here, I've marked out three key areas which all the market bodies are leading on. So at the very top one, dynamic operating envelopes, it's really primarily a technical reform program, looking at how we can manage distribution level system security and constraints. The bits that I'll talk a bit more about in the later slides, it's what the middle part is, the DNSP revenue requirement, future tariff reform, future pricing. And on the bottom one, it's a lot of pilots and a lot of trials going on, and our energy market operator, AEMO, is leading a lot of that work. Next slide, please. Needless to say, the future system needs storage. Storage, it's one of the key things that could harness all the renewable and interruptible energy production. One of the things that I want to impress upon, I guess, we often talk about batteries as just residential battery storage, also grid scale storage. Increasingly, it'll be electric vehicles that will provide some of that too. Next, please. Next one as well. So over the next few slides, I'll talk to you about a key program that the AMC is working on. And because we are a rule maker, we receive rule change requests that are being put to us. So I'll talk through what these requests are. But before we get there, let's have a look at why we need to do some of the changes we need. So distribution networks in particular were built as a one-way traffic system. So that's the system of yesterday. And today it's still sort of largely one way, but if you have solar panels, you have batteries, and you try to export, there are patches of our networks that's starting to have constraint, and that's why sort of that middle picture's got the do not enter, in that some people are facing network constraints. What we need to do is actually look at the tomorrow, the system of the tomorrow, where we've got two-way, multiple-way, different traffic. So the network's role will need to evolve. Next, please. But it's not just the network's role that need to evolve. We also need to look at the regulatory framework, especially when it comes to monopoly businesses that are heavily regulated. So again, the regulatory framework was written back in the days when it was just one-way traffic. And now we increasingly asked to think about, is it for the consumers? Is it for the producers? Or a new term where we've got prosumers, where you've got a customer doing both consuming and producing, or do we just call them electricity system users? Now, similarly, we need to think about things like service quality, reliability standards, how do we charge things? So what it boils down to, it's really evolving the framework to meet the changing needs of the electricity system users. Next, please. Which leads me to the rule change packages that we received. So 12 months ago, we were having sort of roughly the same discussion that we've been having for a while, and we realized that we actually need to do something, otherwise the framework just won't keep up. And there are three organizations, actually four organizations, that came together in a working group and debated and had a very open discussion with the industry on what needs to change to implement distribution level access and pricing. So we've got a consumer group at the top, or two consumer groups in the Australian Council of Social Services, Total Environmental Centre, a network business in South Australia Power Networks, and St Vincent's de Paul Society, which is again another consumer group. But essentially the reforms that they propose, it's about updating the framework, aligning the incentives we provide for network businesses, and sending the right price signals. Next one, please. I probably won't go through all the dot points here, in that the reasons why these rule changes are put forward, it's covered in much of the context, but really it's about changing the framework so that it meets customer expectations and recognizing the two-way flow that the network businesses are expected to perform now. Next, please. Why is it important? Why are these rule changes important? Amongst the market institution, we are considering these rule changes as foundational to any future market design. Essentially, some of the network's inherent capacity to provide exports are reaching the limits in some areas. It's not all, but it's in some areas. And if we are to continue to meet the customer's expectation or maintain or improve these services, we need to actually spend some money on the networks. And it goes to how then this expenditure needs to be recovered. Next slide, please. In thinking through these rule changes, what rules we make and what new regulations we introduce, some of the considerations are listed here on this slide. The key thing we are thinking about a lot is what we call regulatory flexibility. Flexibility to allow different networks, different consumers, and the Australian Energy Regulator and the AER to develop choices that customers want. So gone are the days where you've got sort of one set of tariffs, one type of service for all people across all states, and in fact across all Australia, where we're seeing very, very different needs from different people now. And what that regulatory flexibility could potentially translate to is what we call a menu of options offered by the network businesses. And we think pricing has a very important role to play, and efficient pricing signals that could cater for different levels of service quality and different network capacity. And at the heart of it, again, it's letting customers and increasingly governments, who have quite an important role to play in having a greater say on how some of these costs are being allocated. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end. So that's a very whirlwind tour of what we are working on. Happy to answer questions when it comes to the discussion panel. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for this. Dani, do you want to try and share your screen? Otherwise, I got yours ready to go as well, so I got the training now.
That's
a nice perspective.
This is just giving us a yeah, not sure if I can share the application that I'm supposed to here either. It's not coming up for me. Olivia, would you be able to help me as well?
Yes.
If you have that slide pack that I sent through. Lest I take us down the vortex again.
Done.
Thank you very much. Okay, fabulous. I thought that, so my name is Dani Alexander. Olivia gave me 2 titles at the beginning, which you might have heard, and so I thought I would put them back here again. I'm a research principal at the UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures, but I'm also one of the 4 program leaders under the newly established Race for 2030 CRC. So in case you haven't heard of one or either of those organizations, on the next slide, there is a brief description. But before I go ahead, I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I am, here in Annandale in New South Wales, from my home, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So thank you for allowing me to take that opportunity as well. And then following that acknowledgement, I would just like to introduce you to ISF, as well as Race for 2030. So ISF is an interdisciplinary and sometimes transdisciplinary research institute within UTS, which is in Sydney. As I said before, I'm in Annandale in New South Wales. And we have been here since 1997, working towards creating change towards sustainable futures for various organisations and clients. We were very pleased this year to be awarded as the lead organisation of a cooperative research centre, a 10-year grant from the Commonwealth Government, where we will be where we have committed to accelerate the transition of reliable, affordable and clean energy by 2030. That is our acronym that stands for Race for 2030 for the CRC. And at its heart, really, are customers. We're focused on a customer-centric energy transition. And as I said, it's a decade-long research institute, but with a substantial investment opportunity there as well into research towards that goal. Where we're focused on lower energy costs, but also substantial reductions in carbon emissions. So on the next slide, I thought, given that both organisations that I represent are people-focused or customer-focused, I would start at the end, which is the customer-centric view, and present some research findings from some work that our team did at the beginning of this year for ARENA, where we analysed 20 of ARENA's DER projects that they have funded in their portfolio to bring out the customer insights in 2 lenses. The first was focused on customer values and motivations, and the second was focused on the customer journey. And on the next slide, I wanted, this one here. I wanted to explain a little bit more of why we did this and also some of the key findings. So we really believe, and so did ARENA when they commissioned this work, was that DER projects can drive a more customer-centred clean energy transition. And it's an opportunity to learn from existing projects that are innovation projects because they're funded by the Renewable Energy Agency. So they are inherently innovative, given the nature of ARENA's mandate. However, they were all done independently. So we took those 20 projects and we analysed, in fact, about 100 reports from those projects and, of course, our own experience, having actually conducted one of those 20 research projects. And we identified 6 key ingredients to what we termed a happy DER customer, really, which is what we are after. We're after happy customers, which will drive that more customer-centred, cleaner energy transition. So I think most of these are self-explanatory here, but what I wanted to draw out was really that these key ingredients cover the customer journey. So this excerpt here, the 6 key ingredients, does come from that second report. which focuses on the customer's journey. And you can see here that it starts from the beginning, having a deep understanding of your customer, being able to clearly offer your value proposition, and then have great products and have a smooth experience for that customer throughout the whole journey, that will end with building trust rather than degrading it. I've also mentioned, so number 5 there I skipped over briefly, but that is actually one particular point, which is a point on that customer journey that came through as a critical point that might be interesting for some of the people in this webinar, that the installation step is particularly important to customers. So the idea of having super installers that provide that excellent customer experience is really important for that happy DER customer. Of course, earned trust is important, as we perhaps not all of our attendees would know, but in fact in Australia we have fairly low trust in our energy market, in that the Energy Consumers Australia has found that consistently over the last 4 or 5 years that we have about only a third of customers thinking that the energy market is working in their interests. So I also wanted to highlight this finding because number 1 on the list of our happy DER customer was a deep understanding of customers. And this was one of the core findings of the other report, the values and motivations, which was to propose a simple method for understanding the many customers that are interested in owning distributed energy resources. I won't go into the theory or the method behind this in great depth, but I'd encourage you to find the reports and read for yourself. But really what we offered here was a simple method that any DER provider could use. You don't need to be a large energy retailer who invests a lot in customer segmentation models, of which the energy retailers did in these particular projects, which was fabulous, but quite resource and time intensive. Understanding your customers could be as simple as understanding them in the sense, in a core sense based on the universal values that are held by everyone. This particular model works off Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So for those who are familiar with that, you start at the bottom of the hierarchy with settlers that are driven by security and belonging, up to prospectors that are seeking to get ahead and are interested in success, all the way to the top where you're of the hierarchy focused on self-actualization, where new ideas and your classic early adopters live. If you can understand the people that you're talking to, I think Ed mentioned regulatory flexibility in his presentation, you can really deliver better outcomes for the customers if you're able to provide maybe a flexible offering or communicate in a way that is better understood by the customers as well. Now, I'm a champion of the socio-technical approach, so I spent a bit of time on the socio side of that, but I also wanted to talk about a particular technical project that we undertook as well that may be of interest to the audience, which was Networks Renewed, which was, as I said earlier, one of the projects that was analysed under the Customer Insight series, but was in particular the trial that we led over 3 years that was also funded by the Renewable Energy Agency. About a $5 million trial that won the Clean Energy Council's Innovation Award last year. And we were really looking at using real and reactive power from solar and batteries to solve the voltage problem. It was a very specific scope, and we wanted to apply that in a way that would benefit all customers, not just those that have installed systems. So on the here's the pretty graph that we like to present, and I think it looks complex, but really all it is showing is that we proved that with existing stock of batteries and solars, you can actually provide network support services like voltage regulation. This was not a new technology here. What this was particularly reactive power sourced from off-the-shelf inverters that we were able to control and access I think in this case it was 5 to 6 voltage or a 2.5% drop in voltage, sorry, on the network. And that came at no or low cost to customers. And what I mean by that is that there is plenty of free reactive power out there, and even the reactive power that comes at the expense of active power comes at a much lower cost than curtailment. So Ed also mentioned that that parts of the network are reaching their limit, or their export limit. And so this is a solution that is available that does come cheaper to the customer, but also to the distributor as well. So we looked at this option, and the alternative for the network was to split the SWF feeder. That would have cost about $150,000. So this is a much lower cost option. However, and I'll go to the last slide that I have here today, this is something that we were able to do under a trial scenario where we had partners from the distributor. We had AusNet Services in Victoria, and we had Essential Energy in New South Wales, along with tech providers with Reposit and Mondo Power. But in the real world, it's not quite as simple. And I think Ed also mentioned a three-pronged approach of, I guess, that regulatory reform. I guess we've conceptualized it as a life cycle, the life cycle of DER network support from the customer's perspective, all the way from identifying what the need is for the network, to planning for it, pricing it, actually acquiring the customers. I talked a little bit about engagement and acquisition in terms of customer journey before, then integrating it into the SCADA systems of the network, measuring the results, actually paying for it, and then having a feedback loop on the technical side, but also the customer side, so that they're able to, that the system is able to run smoothly. And it just shows you how many moving parts are needed to progress for this to happen in a mainstream perspective. But I guess this is the placeholder for the sequel, in that we are now progressing we're hoping to progress this trial to the next stage, where we can move a trial even further in all of these stages of the life cycle. And we're also tackling it under Race for 2030 CRC, under the Race for Networks program, which is led by Ariel Liebman, my colleague at Monash University. So an exciting space and plenty of work to do. And I think I can answer any questions that you may have in the panel session. And of course, I would be hopefully we're able to share the two projects as well after this session, so you can read further on those if you are interested also.
Thanks, Dani. James, do you want to continue on?
Yeah, I'm going to continue on. I'm just going to share my screen. I benefit from having two screens here, so I think that makes it a bit easier to do. So yeah, my name is James Allston. I'm the founder and managing director of New Energy Ventures, and we're a small little management consultancy that specialise in new energy. And we do a lot of work helping energy cos and other businesses integrate new energy into their existing business models, or create new businesses in new energy. And we've done work in electric vehicle charging, embedded networks, microgrids, solar PPAs, but we're increasingly focused in on batteries and virtual power plants, of which this is going to be the focus of my presentation today. And I thought this is probably perhaps a really practical guide that comes off the back of Ed and Dani's presentation. So one of the things that we're really focused on is, like, how do you get this stuff moving today? Like, it's all very well to have regulatory changes and wait for technology changes or new standards to be applied or whatever, but we really want stuff happening now, and we think it's a massive opportunity. So part of what I'm doing today is sort of presenting some of that, and there's really good examples of businesses that have cracked the model and are moving on this already. And they've already addressed the regulatory and technical challenges that are there. No, they're not necessarily grabbing all the value that's out there, but they're at least getting stuff into the market that's working. So I'm going to start off by showing the size of the prize. So there's this wonderful chart which is buried deep within some of the assumptions and inputs that went into the AEMO's integrated system plan. And this shows that the integrated system plan looked at sort of 5 different trajectories for the national electricity market to go. And one of the trajectories that they looked at was a high percentage of distributed energy resources participating in the market. And so what we see here is that there's really a massive upside for DER to participate in the market. You know, it could be quite small on, say, the central scenario, but if vendors can crack the model and really get things moving, you know, you could have up to 180 Hornsdale power reserves worth of behind-the-meter assets participating in the market, which is just an enormous opportunity for vendors to get into it. So the question is, you know, how do they get moving? And really one of the challenges right now that face vendors is this is a really hard problem to crack. You know, you've got so this is a sort of diagram that illustrates, you know, how a battery in a load could participate in frequency markets, wholesale markets, and you know, get grid support revenue from network cos. And you know, here you've got a really complex system, lots of complex technology, complex co-optimization, all these different stakeholder relationships, and you've got to start somewhere. You know, you need to get into the market and have stuff, you know, sold to be able to actually, you know, get an edge in. And I think we can sort of get lost in a conversation around sort of technology and regulation and stuff like that. But like, there are vendors that have cracked this, and you know, I'd like to sort of talk about, you know, what their sort of takeaways are if you look at their business models and how they've successfully cracked that. You know, how that can be applied for other businesses, and you know, what's your starting point for this particular, you know, entering into this market. So there's sort of really 2 different types of vendors that are heading after this market. You know, there's supply side businesses that think the grass is greener on the technology side, and there's technology businesses that think that the grass is greener on the supply side. But really, you've got to have both, you know, both sides of this market cracked. And the supply side businesses, you know, they're very good at understanding markets and can access market value, but they've really bad track record of selling technology. You know, there's some outliers, but you know, just take Simply Energy as an example, tried for years and years to get their virtual power plant off the ground in South Australia, and ended up giving the batteries away to be able to demonstrate the viability of it. And then on the other side, you've got the technology vendors that are really good at selling technology, you know, selling huge numbers of units, but haven't really got the necessarily the headspace, you know, to think about developing up you know, a VPP solution and accessing the value that's on the supply side of the equation. So you've really got to bring in, you know, both sides of the market, and different vendors have attacked this in different ways. So I think Energy Locals is a really interesting one. You know, they developed a partnership with Tesla to do their virtual power plant in South Australia. You know, that was a way that Tesla could, you know, bring all their technology solution to a vendor that was providing access to the market. And, you know, Energy Locals is a really nimble little retailer. But, you know, they're very successful. They've got 8 megawatts of contingency raised FCAS registered in South Australia. And, you know, they're developing some, you know, really making hay there. Flow Power is another good example. You know, they went on the view that you should provide lots of market access for customers. They made an acquisition of a business in New South Wales that gave them the technology knowledge to be able to sort of sell different DER and battery solutions to their customers. So that was their pathway. And then Shine Hub, which I think is actually one of the most instructive ones, which I'll talk to in a second, which has done it through incremental investment. And so the way that Shine Hub did was they really started off by saying, well, let's just crack the sales barrier first. You know, let's get some assets into the field and make this all work. And so they did that. So they sold solar and battery solutions to customers, no market integration, just solar and batteries. And they were extremely good at it. So, you know, versus the average solar system, where only 13% of solar systems that are being sold with a battery, Shine Hub has managed to sell 70% of their systems with a battery. So massive increase on that. And they really focused in, and I thought Dani's comments before about the sort of 6 ingredients that are involved in being successful in this market were really poignant. But they really focused in like why were customers wanting batteries in the first place, and really touching on those points of trying to help them across the line. And then the next thing was to solve the operational barriers. So they started in 2016 when the Powerwall version 1 launched, and there was lots of teething issues with the early model batteries. And they sort of worked their way through those teething issues. So now they're building trust with their customers. They've got an asset base out there, and they've got revenue. So Shine Hub managed to make $15 million worth of revenue out of $1,000 of seed in 3 years, and they took that revenue and they plowed it into the next part of their campaign, which was to build a VPP. So then they built the software, which was a hardware agnostic solution. It's, I think, a relatively basic virtual power plant, but taking that software solution, building that out, and now they've got the assets in the field, they've got the software, and then they put the last piece of the puzzle in, which was getting the partnerships to unlock the commercial barriers. So they partnered with PowerShop, Ausgrid, and are providing a virtual power plant solution to the assets that they've got within their customer base. So we're originally interested in the CNI space, as I mentioned earlier, and we see that CNI people can access the CNI market in a very similar way. So we actually recently did a piece of research where we looked at 280 different hypothetical battery setups in CNI applications across Australia, with 28 different large customer tariffs in LV and HV in 5 different markets, and looking at 5 different load profiles. So that was a shopping centre, a university, a quarry that had a very, very peaky load, an apartment complex, and a batch manufacturing facility. And we looked at both simple and advanced value stacks in across all of those. And we found that there was actually around 25% of customers, 25% of tariffs across the NEM for that were appropriate could actually make sense through a simple value stack. So that was exclusively behind the meter value that was being tapped into by these batteries. And relatively decent sized batteries, but modest. But you could build quite a large portfolio of batteries just focusing in on those simple value stack opportunities. And then if you took that and you extended that to advanced value stacks, and you were able to make the progression from the base of simple opportunities up to advanced opportunities, you opened up a much bigger market for yourself. So these opportunities extended to around 50% of the tariffs that were looked at, and the battery sizes would triple in size. So going up over a megawatt hour in some situations. So you've really you have a market entry point as a vendor of batteries into the market just selling simple solutions, but you can graduate up into the advanced stuff and that's quite a big opportunity. So what do we recommend as the starting point for different vendors that are looking at this opportunity? Well, the starting point is start simple. The second starting point is use your data. So there's really all the analysis that we did, we determined that whilst there's some sort of rules of thumb and heuristics that you can use to determine when a battery will make sense, it's not as straightforward as solar. So if you've got a reasonably solid roof that's unshaded in pretty much every state in Australia, definitely north of, in the northern parts of Australia, solar's going to work. Like, it's going to pay. Maybe there's some expectations from the customer in terms of payback, but you're going to find a solution there. And so that kind of heuristic does not work in batteries. You've got to look at the interaction of the load, the generation, the tariff, and the when the market events are occurring to actually determine whether you've got an opportunity. And so we built a piece of software alongside the piece of research that we were doing that we've called VIPI, that we're going to be launching into the market as a SaaS product next year. That's basically capable of taking 1,000 load profiles and all the data that's associated with them and crunching through all of them to try and identify where the best possible solutions are within a particular portfolio. And so here's an example of some of the analysis that we recently did for a client who's a CNI solar vendor who has a customer of their own with a portfolio of sites, and they wanted to understand where was the starting point within their portfolio. So we modeled their portfolio of 25 sites and worked out where the best opportunities were across the site and what was the optimum battery size and C rating for all of those batteries. And so of 25 sites, we did about 1,000 tests. So that's like each test is a setup where we run a simulation for 15 years, looking whether the battery would work. And here we're able to support the customer to work from what is the most valuable opportunity in the portfolio to the least valuable opportunity. So in summary, it's a very, very big prize. You know, if vendors can crack this market, it's an absolutely massive opportunity that's out there, that's on hand for the vendors. But it's hard, and you've got to be good at both. And really, the starting point is, in our view, is in the technology, not in the markets. And you've got to have assets in the field that you can actually control. But you've got to be able to do both of those things really, really well. And that the starting point is to start simple, to start with something really easy, and get those assets into the field, because without the assets, basically the rest of the conversation is going to be completely moot. So, and you can do that in two ways. You can start the Sign Hub way, where you start really simple, or you can partner with someone who's already cracked them. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Fantastic. All right. Thanks, Ed, Dani, and James for your presentations. So for the rest of the session, I will be asking a few questions of my own, but I think that, and as some of you have already started, feel free to ask some questions to the panelists in the chat on the right-hand side of the window, and I'll try to pick them as I go. So maybe to start, James, I'm curious, you know, like you're looking at the stacking of the value of batteries, and how is the rough split of the value? You know, where does the money come from, and how do you see this changing in the future?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It really depends on where you are in the NEM. So if you're in North Queensland, in Ergon's patch, a fair chunk of your revenues are actually going to come from demand charge reduction. So, you know, some of the healthiest demand charges in the country are up there. And, you know, if you happen to be in Northern Queensland or Western Queensland, you're in a bloody awesome place to be selling battery projects right now. And then that compares to, say, South Australia, where a fair chunk of the revenues are going to come from FCAS participation and wholesale market arbitrage, and much less so from demand charge reduction. But it really is state by state, tariff by tariff, that ultimately determines, you know, what the value stack will be and what components will be, where it will be from.
Okay, cool. And how do you see this changing? And, you know, maybe Ed and Dani can chip in. Like, you know, in particular with tariff reform, you know, I know some of the beyond the meter battery are going to be making money out of a time of use tariff, or reducing also some of the network import charges. How do you see the tariff reform and, you know, more cost-effective pricing coming in? Do you see this as a plus, potentially by offering more demand charge reduction, or also some? How do you see the overall the impact on the business case for storage? And the other one is, you know, you mentioned FCAS and frequency regulation for the broader name. And, you know, and you mentioned also almost 20 gigawatt market opportunity, and the FCAS and frequency regulation opportunity is not that big. The operator doesn't require that much. So how do you see the matchup between, you know, the need and the shallowness of some of these pocket of values, and how do you see this evolving?
I'll have a go at that first. I mean, yeah, sorry, I'll just jump in. I think FCAS is going to collapse. I mean, it's just a reality. I mean, there's only about 1.2 gigawatts of FCAS that's needed for contingency FCAS, and less so for reg. But there's fundamentally the market dynamics are going to change, right? We're going to moving towards a world where we're going to have lots of solar out there, lots of wind out there. You know, we're moving towards a 100% renewable energy system, and we simply don't know where all the opportunities are going to be in the future. But you've got a 5-minute market that's going to be introduced, that's going to potentially increase volatility in the market. You've got other frequency markets, fast frequency response and inertia markets that might be in there. At some point in time, we're going to figure out the regs around how to get grid company DNSPs participating in the market as well. So that's another value stream that you can access into. So I think what's out there today doesn't necessarily represent the opportunities of tomorrow, but those people that move today are going to be in a really good place in the same way that Hornsdale has been. in a really good place to probably be a first mover in that market as well.
Cool. So you think it's still going to be good? It's just going to be different.
It's just going to change. Yeah, the dynamics. What we have. I mean, just look at where we were even 5 years ago in this market. We had barely any negative price events at all within Australia, and now we're looking at really regular negative price events in South Australia and other markets, and that's just going to continue unless we have a fundamental change in the way that we manage our market. And so, like, the opportunities that we would have been talking about 3 years ago are going to be different. We wouldn't have necessarily foreseen where we are today, and I don't necessarily think we're going to foresee where we are tomorrow. But there are definite trends towards more value being out there, even if FCAS is going to drive up.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, James. And you, Dani and Ed, what is your crystal ball telling you about this business case? How do you see it evolving in the future? What do you think could go down, and what are the new value streams that you think are going to be driving these business case and installation of storage and DI in the future?
Yeah, it's a really and maybe I'll just hop on James's answer there as well, because I think it's a really interesting question about what are today's challenges versus tomorrow's challenges as well. And I had heard Audrey Ziebelman speak recently and was fascinated that she put peak demand in yesterday's challenges and minimum demand in today's challenges. And I think that's I think that there are plenty of people that are still working on the peak demand issue. And there's a question here from Alexander, I think, also that asked why are we talking about residential customers where there's maybe bigger opportunities for commercial and industrial. So with all that in the picture, I think maybe I can answer a couple of things at once. The reason why, I guess, talking about today's challenges, I guess one thing that we're speaking a lot about here in Australia is the fact that voltage is an issue because of the high levels of solar penetration in particular neighbourhoods. So we're talking about streets of solar rather than we're talking about states of solar. Where it's not uncommon to find places where there's 50% of the houses with solar roofs. And so those are, I guess, the problems of today, and the reason why we ran Networks Renewed. That particular trial is that we were trying to flip that problem into a solution, because we could see the potential of those inverters to offer reactive power support, or support using reactive power. That being said, I think that's not necessarily the biggest problem, or the one, or whether you can really talk about there being a bigger problem. I think I'm advocating in all my research this idea of a flexible energy system, and that goes on the supply side, so the solar roofs, but it also happens on the load side. And so I didn't talk a lot about commercial and industrial load flexibility, mainly because I think that's the topic of my presentation in this particular conference, and I wanted to have something left to say for that as well. So maybe that's a bit of a teaser for that session that I'll be presenting. See that commercial space is a huge potential bank of support as well, and that's their load resource as well that has not been fully tapped. I think that is storage. You can talk about battery storage, you can talk about other kinds of thermal storage like cold storage tanks and things like that, but it's also just load, energy use, and when that is timed. And we've talked a lot about incentives here as well. I guess pricing, and there's a big part to play. And maybe I'll hand to you, Ed, here, because I think that there's a question there for you in the chat there about pricing as well. But I guess what we found, as the teaser for my next presentation, is that we found that there is a huge load resource in the commercial and industrial space, but what is blocking that is really the pricing signals that do not exist to incentivize those customers to engage. And if those pricing signals were visible and accessible, so the value stack, as James had mentioned, was accessible or visible and accessible, we might see a lot more activity and a highly flexible energy system from the demand side.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dani. I mean, it doesn't exist in in Victoria. All of Victoria doesn't exist in AusNet, but it really depends on where you're in the country and what's your prevailing DNSP tariff is in that particular area.
So what's your perspective, Ed? What do you think, all the changes and work stream and initiatives and rule changes that are all, in the pipeline, what's your perspective on what that's going to mean for the customers and in particular for DR owners or operators? What kind of changes do you see in the business case and the value and benefits?
I think I'll be with James and Dani on that, and that the future it's sort of as exciting as it's unpredictable, and there will be future uses where pricing comes in, and pricing it's only one of many tools to help this integration. It is about reflecting the value of the energy, or not just the energy, but the value of the services that the grid needs at that point in time. So at the moment in Australia, in both not just the network space but also in the wholesale or retail space, you get some sort of fairly uniform flat tariff that are not reflective of the time and the value. One of the reasons why we have minimum demand is that the cost, not so much the benefit or the value of the energy exported at that time is actually not the same. So where you've got pricing that signals, or at least as closely approximate the value of the services provided, whether it be FCAS or energy, what do you call it, that would help significantly in shifting that. And quite often you'd find, it's the peak demand still exists, and so if you can shift some of that energy generated or spilled during the day to addressing the peak later on, there is actually a significant chunk of value that can be realized there.
Cool. Thanks. And maybe a particular area that Dani touched on and that I want to get your perspectives on, James and Ed, is around the network integration topic and all these kind of localized value stream, because, kind of the value stream that James mentioned and the value stack of DR today is going to be on tariff and or system level value stream, or such as, frequency regulation or wholesale energy arbitrage. But there are a lot of questions about localized or local market and or a number of value stream that could be derived at the local level. So how do you see this? When do you see this becoming material for DR operators? Do you have a date? When do you see this coming online and bringing money into the business case? And what form do you think it's going to take? Is it going to be pricing? Is it just going to be more constraint? How do you see this happening? I only have one question.
In the last 2 minutes. I mean, this is...
That's okay.
Yeah.
I was told we can go over. If you can answer this one and in the next 3 minutes, that's perfect.
I mean, there's just a fundamental regulation problem. That is one area where there is a regulation problem, and it's due to the fact that DNSPs have a regulated asset base, and they're looking for a return on their asset base. And one of the things that they're not very good at doing is proactively looking for operational improvements that are done through operational expenditure. And so there's just this fundamental disconnect between wanting to own the assets and just looking for services out of the market, which is really comes down to how they're regulated. So that's problem number one. So if we can solve that in future regulation, great. I think there's an attempt right now to try and solve that through little rule changes and incentivizing DNSPs to undertake stuff through some of their incentive programs and do pilots and stuff like that. But it's really twiddling at the edges. It's not really, we're not really doing full integration with any of that stuff.
Okay.
A timeline. Oh God, Ed, I'll pass that one off to you, mate. You're the regulator.
Yeah, that's on the point about DNSP wanting to just sort of, there is a fundamental regulatory problem here, and there are so many issues that stem from the way the system has evolved. So, what we're trying to do in the program of work is to get DNSP to think more about themselves as a platform that enables customers to access other services rather than just owning the assets. And we need to move away from the sort of just one-way or two-way transport. They need to become just a transportation agent. You're paying for a service that move things around whichever way it goes, and that's a cultural thing as much as a regulatory thing, because then it forces you to look at other ways of providing the service to the customers that they need. And like James said, a lot of it could just be operating expenditure. You buy buy services from the smaller customers, from VPPs, from battery owners to do what you need to do. It's doing it smarter rather than just continue to build assets on the ground. Output regulation. It's the next cab of my tick box in a regulatory sense. We'll try and solve the pricing problem first, and then we'll move on to output regulation next.
Cool. What's your view, Dani? You talked, and I think you got a very good understanding of the technical problems. How do you see this being translated into value stream and pricing signal or control signal for the DR out there?
Yes, and we did a little bit of work on this a few years ago in relation to the demand management incentive scheme. So we did a review. It was called the Demand Management Incentive Review, in fact, and we looked at just that, looking to see whether the network alternatives versus the non-network alternatives would make sense from the network's perspective, but also from the customer's perspective. And we did actually find that. Given the current arrangement, that there was a mismatch, that something that would be very attractive from the customer's perspective may not be so attractive from the DNSP's perspective, the distributor's perspective. So having something there like the demand management incentive scheme is particularly useful. However, I'm not convinced that that's being fully utilised, and that was one of the options that I suppose we have advocated for. When we talk about demand side options that may compare favourably from the customer's perspective compared to some. I think I mentioned one of the options, but in terms of the SWR splitting option before. But I think we're yet to see the benefits of that coming through. There are other options as well, I guess, that we've looked at in terms of pricing. But I think that is really a big space for trials or, some form of research. And that's something as well that that Race for 2030 is looking closely at, actually across several programs. So under my program, Race for Business, we have it's a big portion or a big area of interest for the partners under our flexible demand piece, but it's also under Race for Homes and Race for Networks as well. So tackling it from different angles, I think, is important because even when there's access to a potential incentive right now that we might not actually be able to, we're not seeing the benefits of that yet, and that might be cultural. The only other thing I would add is that Mark Howard here has been asking some really good questions here around large scale options as well, and so I think what we really are looking for is this least cost alternative. Yeah. And I think that's probably a topic for another discussion, 1 hour. But I think really what we're looking at are least cost options and where they make sense complementary to each other.
Yeah, cool. A question I wanted to take from the audience was how do we make sure that the benefits in bringing all of that DER and in particular solar PV power to the wholesale or to enable it to be exported by the customers? How do you make sure that all of the cost that is going to be incurred to do this, and particularly the network, is going to be worth the trouble, or in a way, or how do you make sure that balance? And I guess in particular, reflecting on what James was talking about of more and more negative prices. If we imagine ourselves in 10, 15 or 20 years, it's likely that most customers would have PV on their roof, and when the sun is shining, we're going to have zero marginal cost power available. So why would we want to unlock this network to a zero value pool price? Do you have any views on this?
question to James or is that a question to me?
Which Ed, go for it. You pick the ball.
Look, yeah, I think that's a hard one to answer. I would say it's the pool price. If it's a fully functioning market, the pool price of zero tells you that there's probably no value or having additional energy put into the system. But the pool price is also time based, and if you go forward to the future, which is probably not so far away, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, if we do actually get some locational signals down, different areas of the national electricity market potentially will have different value placed on the energy at different times. So again, I suppose being a market rule maker, I push on the need for that pricing, that signal to signal the value. And zero, it's possibly a good thing, because if zero actually helps you manage a system securely and reliably, that's what we need.
Yeah, I'd agree with that view. I mean, it's a signal of zero is just sending a price signal to create more demand. Yeah. And so in doing so, you're saying to the market, right, give us more demand, give it however you want, of which lots of people are going to go, great, batteries. Let's do some batteries, or let's create some load flexibility and push our load into the time when prices are cheap, and we want negative prices. Some pundits I see out there are saying this is a disaster with all these negative price events, but it's not really when you start to think about what the future energy system looks like and what we're going to need in that future energy system. And these, sure, the negative price events may not be great from a generation perspective, but it is sending the necessary signal to the market to invest into more load in the middle of the day.
Or shifting of the load, because that's where the future business cases of storage and even sort of changing your generation patterns going to come in.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, I get your point. I think the question was around, do we need to, all the questions that we have around network cost, or all of the smart things that we're trying to do on networks to enable export of DR, which in the end, if you're trying to export something towards a zero marginal from this market, then you would rather not invest in a way to export that energy anyway and try to solve this locally via storage or more. But yeah, there is nothing wrong with zero negative marginal prices. I think it's a question of maybe timing as well, and looking at investment in 50 years lifetime type assets, and versus the speed of change in the prices, as James has highlighted. I see the time is progressing faster than we're solving all of these problems, even if we're trying. So maybe to finish off, I had a question maybe for Dani and also for Ed and James. As Dani mentioned, the customers' trust in the Australian energy sector, it could be better. So and we're talking about more changes and things that might change the business case for some of the assets that they've bought. So what do you see as the main risk of backlash potentially of these things, or what are the key things that you think need to be really taken into consideration to avoid any disappointment and keeping the trust as much as we can from the customers?
Yes, maybe.
Go ahead, Dani. Maybe.
Yeah, I could start, and maybe I can take the cheap answer, which is probably listening. I think that's what we're trying to do a lot more of, which is why we were so excited to do the piece of work around customer insights, is to be able to actually listen to what customers want and then be able to adjust accordingly. Of course, there are technical elements, and I'm happy to talk later about the technical elements of energy system flexibility, but really it has to work for the people that are using the energy. And I think that's really, and I think everyone believes in that, but I think it's time to step up and actually enact it. And that's not just residential customers, as was pointed out in the chat. It's also the commercial and industrial customers as well, what they need, so to help them be able to fit, or how can we make the new energy system fit the customer rather than the reverse way around. And that might look like, yeah, I guess great prices for using energy in the middle of the day, and really that making a business far more productive because they can invest that in something else, into their actual business, rather than spending it on power.
Okay, cool. Do you want Ed and James? Do you want to add to this before we close the session?
I think I would just I would probably just lean on Dani's answer there, and but sort of say, like, if you are looking to start up a business in this space, you really just need to understand customer demand. But in many, if you're looking at commercial industrial opportunities more than residential ones per se, they are going to be taking a commercial lens on this opportunity. And you need to be understanding what the commercials are on these batteries, and really understanding where the revenue is going to come from. And if you look at that, lots of the other stuff starts to drop out as well, and is able to sort of explain. It helps narrow the focus, and it helps define the technology solution that you're going to need if you're integrating DER into the market.
Yeah, with DER, much of the future is going to be customer centric, and we used to make rules thinking, what will the businesses do to get around it? And whereas the mindset is now, if we make the rules, how would customers actually react to it? Will it actually do the work that we want it to do in bettering the outcome for customers? So definitely second what Dani was saying.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you all for your answers and for joining us today, and thank you for the attendees as well. So I hope this sort of appetizer is making you willing to join the forum virtual conference in the end of November. And in particular, you will be able to hear more from the panelists. So Ed will be speaking about pricing structure and network access. And as Dani mentioned, she will be talking about business case and emission benefits of DER and of load flexibility. And myself would be on presenting some of the key findings of our study we did, a REIT-funded study we did on integration of solar PV in the distributed network. Thank you very much for joining, and thanks for your interest. Bye-bye.